Sorry, I should have. We'd better propose this now. The original question was as on the order paper, since an amendment has been proposed as on the order paper. The question is that the original words stand part of the question. Sorry, Joanna Cherry.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by congratulating Her Majesty's Opposition for securing this Opposition Day debate on such an important topic. I'm particularly pleased about it as it gives me an opportunity to talk about the good news story for policing and the tackling of crime in Scotland. Because, Mr. Speaker, we hear so often from the government benches that the suggestion, the allegation that there are major problems with domestic policy in Scotland. Yes. However, when we are able to examine the evidence, that is not the case. And I'm very happy to say that on policing and fighting violent crime, Scotland under an SNP government has a good news story to tell. And the glib and misleading comments that we hear from the new Prime Minister about failures in domestic policy cannot be brought home in relation to issues of policing and violent crime. So I'm particularly pleased to have this opportunity to talk about how we have increased police numbers in Scotland under an SNP government and successfully tackled the terrible scourge of knife crime, which I know from my previous role as a prosecutor in Scotland's highest courts was a terrible scourge in Scottish society. And whilst by not any means gone from the streets of Glasgow and the rest of Scotland, knife crime is being tackled in a successful way in Scotland, which could never previously before have been imagined. And I'll give way.
I'm very grateful, and I hope my honourable friend will join me in welcoming the report of the Commission for Justice in Wales, which was commissioned by the Welsh Labour Government, which draws attention to the fact that there is a jagged edge in relation to devolution in Wales, where criminal justice on the one hand is reserved, and many of those services which underpin it essentially are devolved. And she would also, I'm sure, consider the fact that we do not get policing funded per head of population as we would under the Barnett formula, if policing were devolved to Wales. And I'm sure she will join me in asking the front bench of the opposition, on whom I tried to intervene because I was sure that she would agree with me in this respect with Welsh Labour Government, in that criminal justice and policing per se needs to be devolved as a matter of urgency to Wales, just as it has been so effectively in Scotland.
I mean, I wholly agree with that. And I think matters such as criminal justice, policing and the tackling of violent crime are best fought as close to home as possible by people who understand the communities in which these issues occur. And as I've said, Scotland has a good news story to tell about fighting violent crime and a good news story to tell on policing numbers. And I'm sure if the wishes of Plaid Cymru and the Labour Party, who I believe considerably outnumber Conservative MPs in Wales, were listened to, then Wales could benefit in a similar way. Now, I stress that there's no room for complacency in Scotland, and we continually strive to improve matters. My colleagues at Holyrood do. But I do think that Scotland's successes are something from which the UK government could learn, and therefore I hope that ministers will listen to this carefully, as what I'm going to say is based on evidence rather than flung about allegations about policy failures. In Scotland, crime is down to historically low levels. Recorded crime has fallen by 41% since 2006-2007, and non-sexual violent crime is down by 43% since 2006-2007. Cases of homicide have fallen by 25% in the past 10 years, and the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey shows a 46% fall between 2008-2009 and 2017-2018 in violent incidents experienced by adults in Scotland. Now, it's well known that in recent years Scotland moved from having 8 regional police forces to a single police force, and it's worth bearing in mind that that was really a bit of a no-brainer, as the population of Scotland is only 5.5 million, which seems a very sensible population segment to be policed by one force. And I can certainly say that in the days when I was prosecuting, multiple different practices across the regions of Scotland caused problems. And the benefit of having a unified police force in Scotland is that we have been able to improve best practice across the force. And don't just take my word for that. Let's hear what Rape Crisis Scotland has to say about the single police force in Scotland. The move to a single police force has transformed the way rape and other sexual crimes are investigated in Scotland. It has allowed far greater consistency of approach, including to the training of police officers and to the use of specialist officers. Now, yes, I will give way.
I will acknowledge what the honourable member says in relation to rape crisis and serious crime in relation to Police Scotland, but will the member not acknowledge that moving to a single police force in Scotland has taken away the third leg of a stool in terms of local accountability, meaning that the police force is a much more politicised institution than it never used to be prior to unification?
With all due respect to the honourable lady, who I congratulate on her recent election victory, I can't agree with that. I believe that as a political point, which her party repeatedly tries to make in the Scottish Parliament, and it's not borne out by experience. Now, I'd like to move to police officer numbers, which in Scotland are up by 1,000, despite significant cuts to Scotland's budget from Westminster. As at 30th September 2019, the total police officers were up 1,022 on figures in 2007. In Scotland, we have more officers per head of the population than in England and Wales. The ratio in Scotland is 32 officers per 10,000 members of the population versus 21 officers per 10,000 members of the population in England and Wales. And I would suggest that this sort of ratio, the ratio we have in Scotland, is something that England and Wales should be aiming at. I'll give way in a moment, but I just want to make the point that the proposal by the present government to increase police numbers simply reverses a position that they enforced at an earlier stage. So it's a bit rich for them to expect to be congratulated for reversing their own policy failures. I give way to the Policing Minister.
Yeah, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady. I know she won't want to, well, I wouldn't put it as strongly as mislead the House, but in terms of police officer numbers in Scotland, while she refers to 2007, quarter 4 2008, the numbers I have show that actually the figures at quarter 4 2019 are below those of 2009. So she's neatly avoiding the high point in her maths and illustrating the fact that actually police officer numbers in Scotland have been broadly flat for a decade.
Well, I don't accept that. And I go back to the statistic I quoted, that as at 30th September 2019, police officers stood at 17,256 in Scotland, up 1,022 on the total inherited by the SNP government when Alex Salmond first brought the SNP to power in Scotland in 2007. That is a fact. Of course, there'll be fluctuations in the meantime, but there's a significant... No, that is a fact. And I challenge the Minister, if he thinks I'm misleading the House on the stats I've written out, then let him bring a point of order and bring the stats which contradict the stats that I'm bringing. Because really, I can tell the Minister that it's not just the Scottish National Party. People across Scotland working in the health service, the police and other areas of Scottish public services are sick to death of the glib comments coming from misinformed Conservative government, misinformed by the 6 Tory MPs they're left with in Scotland. No, I won't give way. The Minister had his time, and I saw Mr Speaker urging him to bring his speech to a close, so I'm going to take the time that I have to look at the facts. As we say in Scotland, facts are cheels that Winnie ding. That basically means, translated into English, evidence-based policy making is best. Despite the fact that successive Tory governments have reduced the resource budget of the Scottish Government by £1.5 billion, that's 5% in real terms since 2010, police budgets in Scotland are protected, and police officers in Scotland are getting the biggest pay rise in the United Kingdom. The police budget in Scotland is up by more than £80 million since 2016-17. And this includes a £42.3 million increase in funding for this year alone. Police officers in Scotland are receiving a pay rise of 6.5% over 31 months, compared to just 2% for 2018-19 in England and Wales. And as a result, I'm going to continue my speech despite the heckling from the front bench, because I know it's deeply uncomfortable for the Tories to hear the facts as opposed... These are the facts. These are the facts. Now, one of the main issues that we faced in Scotland was the fact that Police Scotland were being charged VAT, unlike other police forces in the United Kingdom. And as a result of increased pressure by myself and my learned friends, some of that, we won back VAT of around £25 million a year. However, the United Kingdom has yet to refund the £125 million of VAT paid by Police Scotland in VAT between 2013 and 2018. And I hope that this government will look at that carefully.
Yep. You were told about schools as well. Did you fix it for them?
If I may make some progress over the heckling, can I just point out... Well, I realise this is deeply uncomfortable to hear the facts as opposed to the misinformation that this government likes to put forth. Now, it was very interesting at Prime Minister's questions when the Prime Minister was asked a series of facts about the reality on the ground in Scotland as a result of the impending withdrawal of freedom of movement. He wasn't able to deal with those matters at all in any meaningful way because he's not across the detail. Yep. I can assure the government that on this issue, I and my colleagues up the road in Edinburgh are across the detail. And it's not just don't just take my word for it. Look at the issue of knife crime. Now, as I said earlier, Scotland had a really woeful problem with knife crime. For a while, to our shame, Glasgow was the murder capital of the world. But that is no longer the case. And that is because we introduced a public health approach to tackling knife crime, a health approach advocated by the World Health Organization, which has worked very well in Scotland to reduce the incidence of knife crime. And I'm absolutely delighted that so many representatives of this great city of London, from the Metropolitan Police to the Mayor to indeed members of the government, have visited Scotland to look at the public health approach to tackling violence. It really has brought amazing results in Scotland, and it's clearly effective when we look at the fact that violent crime in Scotland has decreased by 49% over the last decade. And crimes of handling an offensive weapon have decreased by 64% over the last 10 years. Now, there's still a long way to go in fighting violent crime in Scotland, but the importance of the public health approach has been that it's recognised that it's a complex issue. And were there to be any doubt about Scotland's success in fighting crime, let me just quote what the Conservative and Unionist parties crime spokesperson said in Holyrood recently. He said it's important to acknowledge that Scotland has turned its record on violence around. That turning around of Scotland's record on violence has happened under the much maligned SNP government, which has a great success story to tell in this area. So let's have credit where credit is due, not for the sake of it, but because facts matter. And in the area of policing and knife crime, we must take an evidence-based approach. And in this area, the success of the Scottish National Party's SNP government in Scotland are lessons from which this government could learn if they so wished, and lessons which could benefit the people of England and Wales if the government were big enough to acknowledge Scotland's success story and follow our example. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.